my name is Lindy Sherries and I used to be a Sangoma. In this channel, I talk about everything, guys. Abokorobela, the secrets that we were taught not to share with you guys, how we used to trick you guys, the spirits, how everything works when you go to a Sangoma for consultation, Yamatambo. So whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, please check out this channel so we can talk about it. If you believe in God, let's share the gospel. If you don't believe in God, you can check out the channel too. I want to hear your opinion, and I want people to actually share their opinion, not insulting me without saying why. Thank you, and I'll see you on my channel.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining me again for this second part analysis of the expose of TBN founders by their son, who was the chief of staff of TBN, Paul Crouch Jr. And this is Promise. Thank you. Good to have you here. Tevis, also good to have you back here. Now we're doing an expose and looking at the words of Paul Crouch Jr. Now, if you hear the name Paul Crouch, obviously you know it is the founder of TBN, Paul Crouch himself. So one of his sons, he named him Paul Crouch Jr. Now, he had this interview, happened to have this interview with his wife, Brenda Crouch, who came out, which he came out to expose a lot of things that his parents were and what he faced when he was the TBN chief of staff, and the reasons he left, because they allowed sin to come into their life. He saw a video of his mother kissing another man. So you can imagine what had happened. Obviously, there's an issue of adultery also there. His dad used to drink and get drunk before stepping into the studio for their popular program called Praise the Lord. Drunk. His dad was an alcoholic. But all of this, they never said anything about it. People who tried to say stuff about it, they shut them up. Big lawsuits because they had all the money. People give them hundreds of millions. Every year, TBN gets hundreds of millions from people. Now they're using that money to shut people up. Their former staff who saw all of this want to say, look, this is who these guys are. They shut them up. Until they died, they never came out to say, listen, guys, we made mistakes. It's sad. So here's an interview with their son. For so many years, for the better part of his life, he was a staff on TBN. His children were staff on TBN. I want you to listen to him carefully. We're going to listen to the first part of this interview. Then we're going to now come back again for the third and final part of this analysis on TBN's leadership. That is the leadership of the founders.
And, you know, throughout the ages, history gives account of great dreamers and visionaries, even men of the Bible whose faulted path led them to do great things. The private stories of these great men and women, however, reveal the human struggle, the sacrifice, the temptations, the victories, and the defeat behind their courageous feats and the building of empires. Well, my guest today has lived a full life of hard work, triumph, conflict, heartbreak, and purpose. He's dined with kings, and yet he still makes room for the poor. His life has been painted with vivid strokes of brilliance, wisdom, and insight, but most importantly, he has embraced the road of humility for the greater work of God in the ever-changing seasons of his life. He's none other than my husband, Paul Crouch Jr. And I want to welcome you, baby, for the second time on Inside Voice. It's always a joy for me to have purposeful conversation with you.
Thank you, sweetie. It's an honor to be here. It really is. And I hope through our stories and through our pain and suffering that we can actually help those that are watching. You know, we've talked about this, that these programs that we do are not about you and me, but it's about the viewer and
Yes.
trying to bring hope and healing to a hurting world. And that's what this is all about.
Amen. And that's why we are going to talk from a really transparent and a pretty vulnerable place today. And we're just going to share some of your story and what God has done, the enrichments, and how He can bless us in the pit when we absolutely feel like our lives have faced the end of an era, the end of a dream. I want you, though, to first give a little bit of background for some of our viewers who might not be familiar with your history and how you served your parents for over 20 years. Collectively, you could tell us at TBN.
Yeah. Well, I think for the millennial generation, all you have to do is Google Paul and Jan Crouch, and a plethora of stuff will pop up,
That's
on
true.
your search engine, and some of it true, much of it not.
Mhm.
But, the thing that I want people to know is my parents, Paul and Jan Crouch, were true pioneers, number one. They pioneered the whole world of Christian television. They had mentors with Pat Robertson and some others, but, they literally put it all on the line. And in 1973, my parents had come through a season of film production. My dad worked for the Assemblies of God. He managed a radio station for a season. But in 1973, God called my parents into Christian television. They connected, many don't remember, with Jim and Tammy Baker, and that was the birth of Trinity Broadcasting Network. And literally, my dad used to say all the time that if you were going to pick two people to start what has become the world's largest network, not Christian network, but one of the world's largest networks, the last two people you would choose would be Paul and Jan Crouch. And the simple reason is this. Number one, they didn't have any money. They weren't talented. They couldn't sing. My dad wasn't a preacher per se. He knew the word, but he certainly wasn't pastoring a large church or anything. But when God called them, and the lesson for each and every one of us is that they were obedient and they said yes to God. They also said, do not despise small beginnings, because TBN literally started in a small little studio about the size of this room I'm in right now. And it just went from there. And when God blesses something, you gotta, you don't know if you're driving the ship or the ship's driving you, because I know there were times with my dad, he didn't know, whether to hang on or jump off. It got so crazy at times. But they were very obedient people, and God blessed TBN. And I grew up in that environment. In 1973, I'm just a young teenager. And the first 7 years of TBN, from 73 to 80, I was literally there every day. I actually went to correspondence high school. I didn't go to normal high school, so I could work with my parents literally every day. I learned lighting, I learned camera, I learned directing, I learned audio, I learned how to clean the toilets, I learned how to run cable. And in those days, literally, we were all doing a little of everything. I opened the mail. I used to take letters to the P.O. box. I mean, it was just, whatever had to get done, we did. And that was a marvelous learning experience for me. It was, it was just something that as a young teenager, I loved. And I knew at that point, Brenda, I knew that media was going to be my future. As a little boy, you grow up, I want to be a baseball player. I wanted to be a policeman. I wanted to be a fireman or a doctor. But at 13, I knew when I walked in that studio for the first time, this was my future. And God really has blessed that since, from that day.
Wow. And that road has taken many, many turns. And at one point, you left and started your own company.
Right. In 1980, I left. I was worried about the rapture in 1988, that we were all going to get raptured out of here. So I wanted to experience a few things that I didn't think, being full time at TBN. But from the 80s to 2000, listen, I worked with TBN very closely. I helped produce shows. I helped start some additional networks. I worked with TBN. I just didn't work for TBN. And in that 80s and 90s, I was able to travel and work with Billy Graham. I traveled with Bill Bright. I directed Hour of Power with Bob Schuler. And I just did a lot of different projects that I would not have had I stayed there full time. But then in 2000, my dad called me and he said, son, we're not getting any younger. I certainly wasn't getting any younger, but I had a plethora of experience and contacts and certainly a great knowledge base to bring back to TBN. And that's what I did. So in 2000, I came back. And for 12 years, I was there literally every day running production, building new studios. I mean, it was never a dull moment. And it's, I loved every moment of it. But then in 2012 is what we call the perfect storm. And that's when I left.
Yeah. And you went from being really behind the scenes for so many years to really something you may not have realized how gifted you were at being in front of the camera as well. And you were thrust in front of the camera for various reasons, which you can talk about, but it kind of led you to this season where you did enter the perfect storm. And many people have questioned, well, where did Paul go? Many people were hurt. For years, there's been a lot of questions that have come to us privately. And I think that it will help to bring some clarity today and some healing for you to be able to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, again, in the early 2000s, my dad's health started to decline a little bit. What we later found out is he was dealing, believe it or not, with alcoholism. And I was struggling with that as a son, where the son kind of becomes the father and the father, to the son to the father. And so that was an issue. So I started hosting a little daily show we did called Behind the Scenes. And it was a daily report on here's what's going on at TBN. I did that alone. I did that with my father. I did that with various guests. And then, like you said, I kind of went in front of the camera, kicking and screaming a little bit. And I started to host Praise the Lord program. And, when a door opens, you walk through it. And that's simply what I did. It was not my goal or my dream to ever be, in front of the camera. But I do know, and I did get feedback from people that were ministered by the shows. The interview styles I had was very different than many other hosts we had. So I was just a part of the, of the overall pizza, so to speak. And I brought my own style and flair to all of that. But, in late 2010 and 11 is when a lot of drama started to take place. My brother was running a film company called Generation Entertainment. And for years, we were funding money to Generation from TBN to do films. The goal was that that money would generate revenue and bring revenue back to TBN, in addition to being able to air the films, and then let that fund kind of perpetuate itself as we would do more and more films in the future. The issue and the problem was that just never came to be, and that just never came to fruition. And finally, my dad said, okay, we are done funding Generation Entertainment. We're not funding any more money to that corporation. And it was a public corporation. It was on the New York Stock Exchange, and there was just some issues with a nonprofit that we were very concerned about. So Matt came back in 2010. I was on the board. They brought Matt on the board. We were kind of dealing with some issues there. And clearly, if you look at the history, my brother wanted me out. And we ran into this thing, which still to this day confuses me, because it was kind of like a Jacob and Esau moment. And, my dad, his eyes were dimming in his older age. And my brother clearly lied to him about me. Matt went into my personal email there at TBN, unbeknownst to anybody, and found emails of how I was absconding money, how I was having multiple affairs, and he just dug up all of this dirt, trying to tear me down. And then, which, by the way, after all of this research and everything, none of it was true. That's something that does not ever come out in this story. But the other issue is my daughter, my youngest daughter, Kara, had been molested and raped in Atlanta, Georgia by a TBN employee. And we ran into this situation. I wasn't there. My mother and my aunt and others of our family was in Atlanta doing a telethon. This incident happened, and it changed the world. It changed everything, because Kara finally comes to her mother and says, "This has happened." Kara and her mother go to my mother and Jan Crouch, and she did something that just blows my mind, but it's called victim shaming. And they blamed Kara for what went on. 35-year-old engineer, 13-year-old little girl, and somehow it was Kara's fault.
Wow.
Let's bury this. Let's put it under the rug, because we don't want to hurt the ministry. We don't want to hurt TBN. We don't want to, shake the empire.
That's
TBN
always
had already been dealing with some pretty serious accusations, and my dad had been accused of sexual harassment of a African American employee that had already hit the papers. And this is all public information. If you want to check me out, you can Google any of this. So that's where it got ugly. And what happened is I literally got called and pulled into what I called Sophie's Choice. And if any of us have seen that movie, that poor lady had to decide which daughter to keep with her and which daughter to put on the train, knowing she was going to her death.
Yeah.
And that is literally what I had to face. I loved my parents. I loved TBN. I loved what we were doing. We were getting tremendous salvations and healing reports. But if I'm going to take a bullet for anyone, I'm going to take a bullet for my daughter. And I said, no, I believe her. I believe my daughter. I think she was abused, and I don't think she's lying. And that's what happens. So then Kara goes and gets an attorney, and once attorneys get involved, Katie barred the door. It was like literally opening a Pandora's box.
And for years, that information was actually withheld from you. You didn't know about what happened to Kara because it was kind of hidden from you for whatever reason. But when you did find out, there was proof, and the employee had been let go. And so this put you all in estrangement. It put you all in such a difficult position, and a very, very painful one. Walk us through those days as you gave your resignation, as you had been asked to, thinking this is just temporary.
all right. So that's what happened to his daughter, and that's what his mother, that is the grandmother of the daughter, told the daughter, the granddaughter. You see what we do to women who've been abused. When they come to report, we just tell them, no, it's your fault. That's what a lot of women face, even at TBN. If your grandmother telling you that. So you can see that the leadership of TBN was very totally fragile, and there's a lot of sin there. I hope it has changed, because to be honest with you, I don't even know. Because TBN in itself today, because it's a system, it became a culture. Guys, I'm going to log out and then I'll log in again for a final part where I'm going to play you the rest of the video. So please, I want you to just stay with me. Just come back in 3 minutes and we're going to bring the final part of it, where you're going to hear about his father's alcoholism and his mother's adultery, kissing another man. Obviously, adultery was happening there and all that. God bless you. Please make sure you subscribe.